China in the Olympic spotlight, next on International Focus.
The Institute of World Affairs at UWM and Milwaukee Public Television present International Focus, a global magazine linking Wisconsin and the world.
Welcome to International Focus. I'm Robert Ricigliano, Director of the Institute of World Affairs at UWM. The road the Olympic torch is traveling to Beijing has proven rocky for its Chinese hosts. Despite pleas to separate politics from sport, the upcoming games have drawn unwanted attention to Chinese policies in places like Tibet and Darfur, and criticism of its human rights record at home. Several nations are contemplating high-profile actions aimed at showing displeasure with Beijing, and China's Olympic moment has become a significant public relations challenge. To help us explore how the Olympic torch has become a beacon for China's critics and how Beijing is responding, we're joined in the studio by David Buck, Emeritus Professor of History at UWM and internationally recognized scholar of Asian history and politics. We're also joined by phone by Lobsang Tenzin, President of the Wisconsin Tibetan Association. Welcome to International Focus. And Lobsang, I wonder if we could start with you, and could you give us a bit of a summary or an update as to what is happening now with the conflict between Tibet and China?
As you know, if you look back, way back, Tibet has been an independent country until occupied by Chinese started in 1949, and they captured in 1950 and 59. All the Tibetans with His Holiness came to India as a refugee. Since then, about 50 years, all the Tibetans has been under Chinese, and they had been they have a problem with all this basic human rights has been denied in Tibet, and for 50 years, these people, Tibetan people, have no freedom of speech, no freedom of religions, and no freedom of cultures. So they become a resentment, and then the 50 years has been passed. That's what, for one life of a human being, is a very long life, but for the country, it's just not very long. So this resentment started from last year, just slowly, when U.S. Congress awarded a gold medal to His Holiness for his peace and compassionate to humanities. And then it started at this time, after the 10th March, the processions and demonstrations have not started only on Lhasa, but it has started in all parts of the Tibet, even in a very small village way down in Amdo, where His Holiness was born in 1935. It started in every village because they cannot able to live with the resentment under Chinese. Chinese may say that Tibetans are very happy under China. If they are very happy under China, they should be living very peacefully, and they won't show any resentment too. Tibetans in exile, and including Wisconsin Tibetan Association, we are not against any Chinese people at all. We want Chinese to have a Beijing Olympics, but Olympics, the Olympic game itself is brotherhood and free spirit, and it should be held in a place where there is a basic human rights been respected to all Tibetans, also to the Chinese people too, and that's what we wanted. And if you see, they have brutally cracked down a lot of Tibetans since March 14. So far, death toll has 203, and many have taken to prisoners. We don't know at all. Even though you look at it now, the small Lama, the pension Lama, now, at the age of 6 years, they have been captured, and we don't know where he is. And April 25th, we celebrate his 19th birthday, and we don't know where he is. We really want them, Chinese, to release these small children to their monastery, and so they can learn some religious beliefs and teachings, etc.
Well, has the Olympics, though, become the world stage that the Tibetans are using to popularize the plight of Tibet?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Maybe some people may feel that, but I don't think so. But it's such a coincidence with the Olympics. But we are not using Olympic as torch as to get the attractions of international communities. And every international community knows China is the worst human rights as far as human rights is concerned. So, and China has involved in Darfur. They're involved in Darfur. Even the Chinese people who practice Falun Gong, they don't have a right to practice religion in China at all. This human rights issue is not only for Tibetans, only everyone who lives in China. And we didn't take any advantage of this Olympic torch as the getting attention for the Tibetan cause at all.
Well, certainly, though, it seems that the Olympic moment and the attention that it has brought to China has, I would imagine, made it more difficult now to deal with China in response or around the protests that are happening there, because China very much not wanting to have this situation popularized in the middle of its Olympic Games. So is it now more difficult to deal with China?
I think if you have heard recently, they have extended that they said that they will talk to His Holiness Dalai Lama or his delegates to a negotiation. I think that's a very good first step, but it should be done in a meaningful way, not sort of talking. It should be done in a meaningful way. I know that China is blaming everything for His Holiness, what happening in the torch. Everybody has a right to demonstrate. Demonstrations happen in Paris and in London and San Francisco. Everywhere there's a demonstrations. These demonstrations are not for the pro-Tibetans, but for the human rights. They know that there's no human rights in Tibet at all. So they are wondering for the they know the value of human rights, how much we enjoy in the free countries, and they don't have any human rights in Tibet at all. Even nowadays, if you see, a lot of Tibetans have become a minority in Tibet because of influx of Chinese people to Lhasa. All the Tibetans are shoved back at the village, where they don't have any lands, they don't have any means of livelihood at all, and all the jobs were taken by the Chinese people. They don't have any occupation at all. So they are becoming a minority in their own country, and they have a difficulty earning because all the jobs are taken by the Chinese.
Lobsang, let me break in here and ask, if these negotiations with the Chinese and the Dalai Lama were to go forward, what would you see the autonomy that the Dalai Lama wants for Tibet? How would you see that working? Do you have a conception of how that could work?
Yeah, if you look at the way back in 1987, Dalai Lama has proposed a 5-piece plan. That's a 5-point peace plan for the Tibet. He wants actually the Chinese should control the external and foreign relationship with other countries, and the Tibetans should have a full autonomous inside. They have a freedom of religions, freedom of practice cultures and traditions, and their own government, sovereign government inside, and outside they want Chinese to deal with it, so that China and Tibetan can live neighborhood for a long time, and they can live for the future for the neighborhood too. And 1987, His Holiness said that he wants the whole of Tibet transformation in the zone of peace, and also he wants the transfer of populations. Chinese population transferring to Tibet is become a very threatened to the existence of Tibetan cultures, and and he wants the China to respect the human rights and democratic freedoms in Tibet. And also he wants to protect the restorations of Tibetan natural environment in Tibet right now. And then he also doesn't want to nuclear productions in Tibet at all. Right now, China might be preparing for nuclear weapons in place in Tibet. So he don't want all this steps, because these are the things threatening to the humanity as well as the natural environments. And he has mentioned this very clearly in 1987 in European parliaments, and China has so far not accepted at all.
Well, this would enable the Tibetan Autonomous Region, which is what Tibet government is now under. It seems to me that the Dalai Lama's position could be accommodated with that Tibetan Autonomous Region. You'd have to leave out those regions that were previously part of Tibet, Amdo and part of Kham, which have been absorbed into regular Chinese provinces and in which the Han Chinese population now outnumbers the Tibetans, but it would still leave Tibet with a sizable region. Do you think that would be acceptable?
I think that once the negotiation starts, and as we agreed what the Dalai Lama has requested for a long time for the autonomies, because he knows that the fighting with the Chinese won't solve the problems, and this is the best way the Tibetan can achieve their own freedom, basic freedoms, human rights, basic freedoms, and this is very acceptable to the majority of Tibetan. But there may be some different viewpoints from the Tibetan youths, and that's everybody has their own viewpoint, but majority will be accepting the autonomous, because if you look at the Tibetan people in Tibet, they are suffering a lot, and 50 years they have been suffering under Chinese. They don't have any food to eat. They don't have any freedom of speech. They don't have any religious practice. And the women has been sterilizations by the Chinese. They have to suffer.
Can I break in?
Even a little bit of freedom and autonomous will be helping a lot, and people will accept that kind of autonomous and freedom too.
We're just up at a break, and I'm wondering, Lobsang, if there are a couple places people might look for additional information on Tibet.
Yeah, and if you want to, I'll just take this opportunity just to request all the listeners of the Wisconsin, Milwaukee televisions. I really want, if they can help us to solve these problems, like to send a journalist, a foreign journalist, and to Tibetan areas just to find out the truth, what's happening in Tibet. And also it requires the International Red Cross and independent non-government doctors and nurses, and to go and help the casualty, what's happening in Tibet. And also the human rights groups to send to Tibet to watch what are the human rights been abolished or by the Chinese. And also to set up a U.S. office of U.S. in Lhasa to watch and monitor the activities of Chinese destroying the human rights of Tibet. And also, if you can go to the website, more information, www.savetibet.org, www.stoptibetcrisis.net, and www.studentsforfreetibet.org and www.wistib.org. And I would like to thank you, everyone, for giving me this opportunity and share my thoughts.
Well, Lobsang Tenzin, thank you very much for joining us on International Focus. We have a short break, and we'll see you in just a moment on International Focus.
Thank you.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus and our discussion of China and its Olympic spotlight. We're joined in studio by Dr. David Buck. David, we heard some from Tenzin. I'm sure you had some thoughts on that. But before we get to that, I'm wondering, you've spent a lot of time studying the Chinese and familiarity with the Chinese mindset. Without speaking for the Chinese government or anyone else, how do you think the Chinese are looking at this situation?
Well, I think the Chinese response has been much stronger and more dramatic than I ever thought it would be. We see the official response in the paper calling the Dalai Lama a splittist clique and claiming that he wants independence. But I think the popular response is what is, the official response was predictable. I didn't think that the popular response really was predictable. And they see this as the West trying to take away their great opportunity in the Olympics, that this is China's coming out party. China has been growing like a teenager, just sprouting up for these past 20, 30 years. It's just a remarkable story, and Chinese people are so proud of what they have accomplished. And now they see this moment when they have spent this enormous amount of money to rebuild Beijing, to make this wonderful grounds there. All it's coming at China is criticism. And some of the Chinese students in the United States have given wonderful voice to this. They say, you wear Chinese clothes, you buy Chinese goods, and that you complain about us. We've accomplished all these things, and yet you complain. You hold that up to us. Yes, there is pollution, but we're trying to deal with that. Yes, we have, but now we're being criticized for Tibet, and we've helped out Tibet in their view, that the Tibetans used to live under this feudal system in which the monasteries and a few aristocrats ran everything, and we freed people. I mean, admittedly, this is an anti-communist, anti-religious government, but they have restored some religious rights in China, and they destroyed a lot of monasteries, but they've been rebuilding some. So the Chinese see this as really unwarranted, and I think there is a true popular anger at the West and all the forces that are trying to humiliate China, and they see it as we're once again trying to humiliate China.
Is the fact that I mean, I imagine the issue of Tibet or Darfur or human rights in general would be, in and of themselves, difficult issues to discuss with China, whether it's officially or in the media, the unofficial channels. Does the fact that this is also happening now with the rise of the Olympics complicate things, or does it open a door?
No, I think it's complicated things. I really do, because again, this has been sold to people in China, and they bought it, just as other countries around the world. Japan, when they had the 1960 Olympics, it was kind of their ability to get over the Second World War. When South Korea had the Olympics, it was their chance to shine on the world stage. And the Chinese see that this is their chance, and it's due to them. They feel that it's their due with all they have accomplished. And now that everyone is slinging mud at them, and that we've seen the politicization of the Olympics. And the Chinese had hoped that wouldn't happen, but that's the reality of the 21st century, that anytime there's a world media is focused on anything, we see that's where the protesters go, because that will get them their attention. So and they really weren't quite ready for this. They had hoped this would be a wonderful hour for them, and it's turning out not to be, and they're angry about it.
Now, I suppose also this puts international leaders in the International Olympic Committee in kind of a tough spot, which is, well, if China's so bad, why are we all going there for the Olympics? Were we wrong to have it in Beijing to begin with? So in terms of, I mean, it complicates things certainly for the Chinese, but for the United States or the Europeans or others who might want to help deal with an issue like Tibet or Darfur or human rights in general, does this put them in a bind too, in terms of how they can be influential with China?
Well, it does. It does. And so you've seen various responses. Sarkozy in France has responded very dramatically. President Bush here in the United States has been much more moderate. And in fact, I think his response is better. That is, I think that at the heart of the Olympics is really not, it's really shouldn't be totally politicized. And if we're going to have an Olympics, we should try to keep it an Olympic sporting event, although national competition still dominates it. And you can argue you shouldn't even have them because it's dominated by this, how many golds you're taking home. But I don't think it's a good idea to further politicize the Olympics. But, something like this could kill the Olympics. It really could. I heard just this afternoon that the Chinese are taking the Olympic flag up on the north side of Mount Everest. They've closed the north side of Mount Everest, the Tibetan side, and they've asked the Nepalese, and the Nepalese have agreed to close the south side and to take away telephones and cameras and cell phones and computers so that there couldn't be any protests on Everest over this. So it's the media rush and the worldwide media now attracts all this attention, and we find these things becoming more and more politicized.
In terms of U.S.-Chinese relationships, I mean, that is another factor in this too for President Bush or whomever. You can only push this issue and the Olympics so far before you're looking at, well, this is a much bigger relationship, huge economic implications and political implications for places like Darfur and North Korea. How does this play into the complex web of the U.S.-Chinese relationship?
Well, you don't hear a lot about it, but I mean, let's be, if you want to be brutally realistic about this, China with more than 1.3 billion people, and there are at the most 4.3 million Tibetans, and the United States has this huge trade and this huge investment in China. The Chinese hold all these American treasury bills. We are not going to cut off the Chinese. We are not going to really harm our relationships with the Chinese over this issue. As passionately as people feel, as admittedly, in fact, I agree that with the Dalai Lama that he should be able to negotiate a more autonomous relationship with the People's Republic of China. But are we going to endanger our entire relationship with China over this? No, we are not. And so the response, the United States has never recognized Tibetan independence. Never. We hand out congressional medals. We make the Dalai Lama gets the Nobel Peace Prize. But the official position of the United States government has been since the 1930s, through all the administrations and all the changes that have gone, is that Tibet is a part of China.
Now, in terms of the Chinese psyche, and especially that of the leadership, how are they best influenced? Confrontation doesn't seem to be the best way to do it because they'll always confront that themselves.
Yeah.
So how do you go here to influence the Chinese on issues like Tibet, on human rights in general, as well as the other trade and other political issues we deal with?
Well, sometimes, Rob, I'm not the best guy to answer this because I'm not very confrontational in my approaches to things. But sometimes confrontation works. Sometimes it works, and I've seen it work, where people have gotten tough on issues and say, we're not going to step any further until we see some more human rights, or we're going to see these people released from prison, or things like that. That kind of thing can work. But you have to pick and choose the incidents. I think in this instance, what the United States should do is push the Chinese leadership to have a real discussion with the Dalai Lama and to try to negotiate some form of autonomy. And the real question, and what I would like to have asked Lobsang Tenzin about this, is would that autonomy still have a role for the Chinese Communist Party within Tibet? Because that's really been the issue. In both the Soviet form of national autonomy under the Soviet Union and in the Chinese borrowing of that for these autonomous regions, which is just a borrowing of a policy that really was a Stalinist policy that goes back to the 1920s. The real issue has been, should the Communist Party still have a role in these autonomous regions? As long as it does, as long as it dominates the government in these autonomous regions, then the Communist Party has control. Now, would they accept the Dalai Lama running this without a Communist Party in charge? That's to me the real breaking point in these negotiations.
So this Tibet could, in some respects, go the way that, say, Hong Kong has gone in terms of autonomy, but with a sort of central state role.
Well, and that's exactly what's happened in Hong Kong, as you realize, that Hong Kong still has not had any free elections in Hong Kong, and the first free elections there are planned for 2017, 9 years from now. So, and it reverted in 1999, so that's 18 years after reversion, they'd have their first free election. So it would certainly go slow, but my guess is that it probably might make it if Hong Kong will live with it. Maybe the Tibetans should live with a similar sort of formula.
We've got about 30 seconds left, David. I'm wondering if you could venture a guess as to how this plays out now from here on into the actual holding of the Olympics.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to see a lot more protests and a lot more bad publicity about China, and we're going to continue to stir up Chinese resentment. It's going to be because there are other issues. We haven't gone into Africa and all their problems in Darfur and other places, arms shipments to Zimbabwe. We haven't gone into the heparin scandal of medicine. This is about the pollution in Beijing. We're going to hear a lot of bad press, and China has to find some way to counter it, but so far they haven't.
Oh, this is part of being in the spotlight, I suppose. You got to accept the good and the bad.
It is. It's like running for office. You got to deal with the good and the bad publicity.
Great. Well, Professor David Buck, thank you very much for sharing your insight on China with us. We also want to thank Lobsang Tenzin from the Tibet Association as well for joining us earlier by phone. To our viewers, we'll see you next week on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website,